Their eyes are just focused in on this horrific action. Some of the best ancient history movies, in my opinion, begin with an epic battle, and we've got one right here. The name, Maximus, Decimus, and Aurelius. Salve, my name is Tristan Hughes, host of the Ancients podcast, and today, well, I'm reviewing one of my favourite films, Gladiator. We're going to be sorting fact from fiction. This is Deep Dive with History Hit. Alright, here we go, the initial battle scene. Some of the best ancient history movies, in my opinion, begin with an epic battle, and we've got one right here. So this is supposed to be Germania, which the Roman sources always kind of depict as being quite swampy, wet, complete opposite to a place like sunny Italy in their ideas. So always kind of portrayed as this place that most Roman soldiers didn't really want to be. There's Maximus talking to, looks like a cavalry contingent in the forest. It's interesting, the cavalry, they seem to be equipped almost like Roman legionaries, although we know from tombstones the cavalry were largely auxiliaries, so non-Roman citizens recruited from various parts of the empire, usually with chainmail, and they would have had a spear and then a long sword called a spatha. They're the Germans once again. Interesting uniform depictions there. Most Germans, their main weapon was a light spear called the framea, and only the most elite would have had a sword and some chainmail. One of the things that the Roman army had that so many of their enemies didn't, and they had such an advantage in, was artillery. Each legion had more than 50 pieces of artillery by this time, and the psychological impact that that had on an enemy army was huge, to such an extent that in many battles, in many cases, the legionaries didn't really have to go into the thick of the fighting because the artillery just scared them away right at the start. Here goes the artillery. You have stone throwers, but you also have bolt throwers. These great ballistae, they found evidence of these in places as far away as the Scottish borders and also a place like Masada. And those bolts, they're quite big in this depiction. They were probably a bit smaller, but they could pierce both shield and flesh. You see the legions advancing there, standardized equipment. The equipment would change whereabouts the legionary was in the empire, but largely their equipment was standardized by this period. And in contrast to many of their enemies, as you can see here, the Romans, they would advance in silence until they get to the final 50 meters or so, or 50 feet, when they would throw their spears, and then they would shout. Complete contrast to many of their enemies who would be war cry, they'd be shouting to build up their courage, their bravery. The Romans, they advance in silence until that final last bit. You can see very much the difference in armour, and this portrayal, it's an interesting, most Germans would not have had body armour. The elites, the nobles, would have had chainmail and would have had swords, but most of the Germans would have had spears, maybe, well, they had clothing, maybe some of them would have had shields, but they wouldn't have had much in terms of equipment. Interesting here, and this is something you see with German depictions of ancient Germans a lot, whether it's in Gladiator here or in games, is the depiction of them with these massive, like, two-handed weapons, like massive axes. I think that guy was wielding a carnix as well. But as I said earlier, actually the main weapon of many Germanic peoples, it wasn't the axe, it was the spear, and a light spear called the framea. So here is Maximus fighting in the midst of the battle, and as primarily a man who focuses on Hellenistic history, this does evoke the fighting style of Alexander the Great and his successors. Usually, the Roman commanders were the centurions. Centurions would be there, but the senior commanders would not be anywhere near the front lines of the battle, like potentially being killed in the midst of the battle because it was too big a risk. They are dictating the battle from further away. So this is actually a very Hellenistic depiction of Maximus, but I like it because it emphasizes later a key part of the film as to why the soldiers who served under Maximus, they loved him so much. They had such adoration because he was serving amidst the front ranks of his men, as many of those Macedonian soldiers did with Alexander. And I'm not someone who gets really annoyed if like the depictions of a battle in a great movie aren't exactly accurate as they were historically, because this gets more people interested in it, and then you can explore it more to find out what's the fact, what's the fiction. I mean, as Hollywood, as a great piece of visual entertainment, I can think of few better battle scenes than the beginning of Gladiator in this one here. So this scene is loosely based on one of the biggest military campaigns of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, which was fought beyond the Danube, beyond the Rhine, against Germanic peoples such as the Marcomanni and the Quadi. And this is a battle scene from it. Obviously, because this is set at the end of Marcus Aurelius's life, it's kind of portrayed as it's the final throes of resistance by these people. But in fact, really, this war ends, there is a peace gained by Commodus, Marcus Aurelius' son and successor, as soon as Marcus Aurelius dies. And maybe not a stalemate, but it's not that the Romans absolutely achieve a complete victory and they create a new province. They don't. It's the fact that this war ultimately lasts for some 15 years, and the Romans, they've had a lot of other stuff going on at the time, not to mention a massive plague. And Commodus, when he becomes emperor, he just decides enough is enough.
Caesar.
Tell me again, Maximus. Why are we here?
For the glory of the Empire, sire.
Ah, yes. Ah, yes, I remember. Do you see that map, Maximus? That is the world which I created.
So here he is, Marcus Aurelius, depicted by Richard Harris very much as this philosopher, emperor, the man who wrote the Meditations, which no doubt were largely inspired. A key source of inspiration was his time fighting the Marcomannic Wars, but also the other great issue that he had to deal with, one of the issues which was the Antonine Plague, which wreaked havoc in the Roman Empire. And Marcus Aurelius thinking about the things that he did have control over and not worrying about the things that he couldn't control, otherwise he would go mad, hence that kind of stoic thinking.
Come. Please. Come sit. Let us talk.
That's an interesting scene there, because I can see all those statues there. One of them, in the right, looks like Mithridates of Pontus, a great enemy of Rome. I think another one looks like Agrippa, one of the great aides of the Emperor Augustus more than 100 years earlier. And another one there looks like Septimius Severus, who isn't even born yet. So that's an interesting choice of statues that whoever was making this set just decided to bring out for differences in appearance right there.
What would you have me do, Caesar?
I want you to become the protector of Rome after I die. I will empower you to one end alone, to give power back to the people of Rome and end the corruption that has crippled it. Do you accept this great honor that I have offered you?
In this depiction here, we have kind of Marcus Aurelius thinking back of like the days of old, the days gone by that I know so many people sometimes think, oh, we're decaying, we need to go back to a different form of government when the people were better, and this idea of returning to the republic of old. I hate to break it to you, but Marcus Aurelius actually had no such beliefs. So Commodus did not murder Marcus Aurelius by suffocating him to death, but what it kind of there I think was meant to highlight is this common perception. There's a famous quote by one of the Roman historians, Cassius Dio, that following Marcus Aurelius' death, the Roman Empire went from a kingdom of gold to a kingdom of rust. And the sources that we have surviving for Commodus, the literary sources, are all very hostile to him. They depict him as one of, if not the worst, Roman emperor of all time. So here we are. This is Rome here. You can see the Circus Maximus, the Colosseum, Rome, the Eternal City, City of Seven Hills. Rome in the imperial period at its height is roughly 1 million people. It's quite dark, the lighting. It does kind of give off dictatorial vibes. These massive equestrian statues you see there, one of Augustus Prima Porta. I think there's Marcus Aurelius' famous statue there too. So you can see the classic depictions of Roman statues here all together, not in the right places, but just to kind of emphasize the elaborate nature of this entrance into Rome. This is Commodus returning from the Marcomannic Wars in triumph, as he did, on a chariot, this triumphal chariot. The Romans loved the chariot, sometimes pulled by 4 horses, really to show the Roman dominance over nature, and in other cases just 2 horses too. There would have been crowds of people as they saw Commodus going through the streets, kind of shouting his name, praising him. And we do know, as mentioned, that these triumphs were at the ends of these military campaigns. Marcus Aurelius, there's a beautiful frieze of him in a chariot at another stage of the Marcomannic Wars.
For your guidance, Caesar, the Senate has prepared a series of protocols to begin addressing the many problems in the city. Beginning with basic sanitation for the Greek quarter, to combat the plague which is already springing up there.
We do know that Marcus Aurelius leaves him this inner circle of very good advisors at the start of his reign, advisors who Marcus Aurelius knew and had used during his own reign.
He spent his twilight hours reading scrolls from the Senate. And all the while, the people were forgotten.
But the Senate is the people, sire, chosen from among the people to speak for the people.
And of course, you also have Lucilla, who is Commodus's sister, and she had originally been married to her father's co-emperor, the co-emperor of Marcus Aurelius, Lucius Verus. Lucius Verus had died, and she'd remarried a very prominent senator called Pompeianus, who was also in the inner circle of Commodus at the beginning of his reign. So within 2 years of Commodus's accession as sole emperor, very early on in his reign in the early 180s, there is a conspiracy against Commodus. There are senators included, there might be the Praetorian Prefect, I'm not completely sure on that, but there's also included Commodus's sister Lucilla, who you see in the movie Gladiator. Now, in the movie Gladiator, there's this portrayal of Commodus almost wanting an incestuous relationship with his sister. And then there are these inspirations from earlier bad emperors like Caligula. There was this infamous story that he had an incestuous relationship with his sisters. I don't think there's that story associated with Commodus, because also Lucilla, she's involved in this conspiracy very early on, and that conspiracy fails. It is not clear if the conspiracy is directly against Commodus or his chamberlain, an influential chamberlain who they didn't like called Sauterus. But ultimately the conspiracy fails, Lucilla is forced to go into exile, and Commodus will later have her killed.
Don't die. They'll feed you to the lions.
So here's Maximus in North Africa. There's his friend Juba. They're both enslaved. It's estimated between 10 and 20% of people in the Roman Empire were enslaved during the imperial period, so it's a massive number. I find this bit really interesting because we know of peoples on the edges of the Roman Empire who gained this reputation as slave traders. Before Britain was conquered by the Romans, you had these late Iron Age British societies going out, capturing other Celts and then selling them to the Roman Empire because they knew it was very profitable for them, infamously.
I want my money back.
Not a chance. A too special price for you.
On what?
Have you seen my new stock? Come and see them.
And here in North Africa, there were a group of people who lived in the desert, the Sahara Desert, known as the Garamantes, an extraordinary people. They helped facilitate trade between Roman North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, but they also gained an infamous reputation as slave traders, going out, capturing people from villages like this figure here, like Juba, and then bringing them to Roman North Africa where they were sold into slavery. And so yes, in some cases, you would have figures like him who would have come from sub-Saharan Africa originally, appearing as a gladiator in various arenas of the Roman Empire.
Do you believe you'll see them again when you die?
I think so. But then, I will die soon. They will not die for many years. I'll have to wait.
But you would. Wait.
Of course.
You see, my wife and my son are already waiting for me.
You'll meet them again.
So this is a really poignant scene of the movie, and the nature of the sources we have surviving for the Romans, literary sources, they're all written by the elites, talking about the elites, and sometimes talking about slaves and gladiators, but we never really get the perspective of gladiators themselves, because yes, although on one level they were seen as these great celebrities, very sexy, on the other hand, they were still slaves. They were assigned to like one of the lowest, most disgraceful classes in Roman society. And so to actually get an insight into, their daily life away from the arena, did they have many interactions with their fellow gladiators? Were there friendships? It's very difficult to get that information, their daily lives away from the arena. There it is, there is the Colosseum, sometimes labelled as one of the eighth wonder of the ancient world. It looks like they've just got this mesh of some of the most iconic pieces of Roman architecture, like the Pantheon, Arch of Titus, and so on. Roads look quite wide there. In reality, they would have been much thinner. There would have been wheel ruts and lots actually of human feces and animal feces. It would have been quite smelly. But also interesting to highlight that you're seeing all of this happen in daylight, when actually a law was introduced that wagons could only enter Rome at night time. So this wouldn't have happened. These people would have been brought in wagons during the night, this kind of traffic element of ancient Rome, an incredibly busy city of some 1 million people.
Have you ever seen anything like that before? I didn't know men could build such things.
The depiction there of the gladiator barracks being right next to the Colosseum, I don't think that would have been the case in Rome. Normally they're not in the centre of the city. But you can understand here for visual effect because of the monumental size of the Colosseum. It was like some 15 modern stories high. And if it hadn't been built in a lower part of Rome, it would have dwarfed absolutely every other building in ancient Rome. So the Colosseum was the largest amphitheatre in the Roman world, and it was initially constructed in the mid-1st century AD by the Emperor Vespasian, finished by his son Titus. And you need to imagine that this arena could house 50, 60,000 people, which I'm a Birmingham City fan, unashamedly. That's probably almost 2 St Andrews. That is probably 1 Etihad Stadium or something like that. So it is a huge amount of people. These are monumental constructions. Even the smaller ones, the stone one, for instance, at Pompeii, could still house thousands of people, and they were a display of power, of wealth, the person who oversaw its construction, but also a place to gain popularity by hosting these very popular blood sports.
Your Emperor is pleased to give you the Barbarian Horde.
you been in the army?
Yes. I served with you at Vindavana.
You can help me.
So this is perhaps the most iconic scene of the entire movie, this battle reenactment of Maximus and his fellow gladiators against these other soldiers who appear very shortly in chariots.
The Legionnaires of Scipio Africana!
Battle reenactments for gladiators, I'm afraid to say that wasn't how gladiators fought. The evidence that we do have for reenactments is largely in regards to naval warfare, and we hear of a few cases, basically the Romans showing that they could do this, that they had the power to move all this water and flood arenas, that we hear of Romans flooding arenas for big naval reenactments with ships. Land reenactments, land battles like this one, Scipio versus Hannibal, the Battle of Zama if I'm correct, or the fall of Carthage, that would not have happened in gladiator warfare. What Gladiator does do really well here, though, is to give you a sense of the whole spectacle itself. You know, rows and rows of people watching, cheering, every sword blow, every spear being thrust, as they are all, their eyes are just focused in on this horrific action that would have been occurring on the arena floor. You'll notice there also the sand, of course, sand used to help clear up the blood that was spilled from these unfortunate fighters fighting here. So what you just saw there was this figure just getting cut in two by one of these scythes on the chariot. Now, scythed chariots, they weren't on British Iron Age chariots, and they weren't on Roman racing chariots or anything like that. However, we do know that scythed chariots were used by certain kingdoms, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean. The scythed chariots used by Antiochus III against the Romans at Magnesia, for instance, and I think Mithridates VI also used them. So there is historical precedent for these scythed chariots. Chariot racing was one of the most important and popular sports in ancient Rome, and you see all these overturned chariots here, the chaos, the mayhem. One thing with chariot racing that was really part of the spectacle was that many of those teams would crash in these things called shipwrecks. And this is almost kind of that recreated idea of the chariot races, which have actually occurred in a different arena, kind of being mixed here with the gladiators, and that all that carnage being kind of meshed into one arena would never have actually happened, but you've got these various different parts of these, like these terrifying, these bloody, these brutal sports of ancient Rome. And so the armour of Maximus and his fellow gladiators, that is not accurate of gladiators. We know from archaeological remains, for instance from Pompeii, but also from frescoes, from mosaics. There's a beautiful one of gladiators from Bignor Roman Villa in West Sussex, near where I'm from. You can see the various equipment types of gladiators, because gladiators fought in different classes. And the Romans sometimes, they liked having a bit of difference between the gladiators who fought, one on one, not really in teams, they fought one against another. So gladiators fighting all together in a team against a bunch of soldiers, non-gladiators, as part of a historical land battle reenactment, in this case from the Second Punic War, that's not historical. Gladiators were pitched against each other. It's been estimated that maybe in one of these gladiator spectacles, about 5 to 10% of the gladiators would die. However, when you consider that one of these gladiators was expected to do maybe between 20 or 30 fights in his career before they could earn their freedom, I mean, the chances of them ultimately dying in the arena were still very high indeed. The whole question of reenactments, land reenactments in the Colosseum, no evidence for. As mentioned, gladiators pitched against each other in these clashes. We do have evidence of naval battle reenactments, but they never took place in the Colosseum except for one instance that I can think of during the inaugural games when a smaller scale naval battle was created and the arena was flooded. But there was a different arena that nearer the Tiber for those naval battle reenactments. And I think also Claudius does a naval battle reenactment where he uses Lake Fucine as well, not too far away from Rome.
Gladiator, the Emperor has asked for you.
I'm at the Emperor's service.
So here is Commodus entering the arena. He's got his Praetorian prefect there, members of the Praetorian Guard in their purple, really emphasising an elite status. Purple, the colour of the elites, obtained from murex shells, places like Tyre in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Rise! Rise!
Commodus did hold these great games in Rome, the plebeian games, but they were right at the end of his rule in the early 190s.
Was it Hercules? Why doesn't the hero reveal himself and tell us all your real name?
Interestingly, Lucilla, who's depicted there, she wasn't alive at the time that Commodus actually held these great games. She'd already been killed on Commodus's order. Here is the turning of the back, this kind of show of disrespect. I don't know if there's any evidence of that, but you would always, of course, with an emperor who was your senior. I mean, most people would never even see an emperor in the flesh, in person, up close. But this is just to emphasize, an absolute mark of disrespect.
My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the North, general of the Felix Legions, loyal servant to the true emperor, Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance.
The name, Maximus Decimus Meridius. Let's talk about this. So Roman names are really interesting. Elite Roman names, they were structured. So first you had a praenomen, which is basically your first name. Then you had the nomen, which was the clan, the gens that you belonged to. And then you had the cognomen, basically your last name. So the great example of this is Gaius Julius Caesar. So Gaius praenomen, Julius nomen, his gens, the Julia gens, and then Caesar, his last name. With Maximus, Maximus Decimus Meridius, Maximus is a cognomen, Decimus is a praenomen, and Meridius is the nomen.
So I've actually made a bit of an error here. Meridius and Maximus are both cognomens, and actually Maximus, the character, he has a fourth name that is mentioned a bit later in the film, Alias. Alias is the nomen, so actually his name should probably be something like Decimus, the praenomen, Alias, the nomen, Meridius, the cognomen, and then Maximus, a second cognomen, also known as an agnomen. So my name is Decimus Alias Meridius Maximus. So yeah, glad we cleared that one up.
Shadows and dust, Maximus! The grinning Lyceum of Antonius Maximo! Caesar is proud to give you Alias Maximus!
So personally, alongside the initial battle scene, this is one of my favourite parts of the Gladiator film. This is Maximus. He's got quite a following by this time. You can see the crowds cheering his name. They know his name. And we know this is one of the really interesting things with gladiators, that on the one hand, yes, their social status was basically the same as sex workers and actors. They were seen right at the bottom. People that you weren't, if you were a respectable Roman woman, you certainly weren't allowed to marry. At the same time, they had these massive followings. They were the celebrities of the day. There would have been advertisements in the towns where they were going to be fighting in, saying, come to the games on this day and you can see the fantastic, the undefeated, or whoever, like Hilarus or Marcus Attilius are two good examples, for instance, from Pompeii of that. We know that there would have been tigers, there would have been other exotic wild beasts that were brought to arenas, but they didn't fight at the same time as gladiators. They fought during the morning in these things called the beast hunts, and sometimes they fought against other wild animals versus wild animals in various scenic settings. Scenery would be put in the arenas. Other times they were put against specially trained fighters, the bestiarii. This was the height of a day's entertainment at the games. This is what you came to see. This was the high spectacle with these well-known figures fighting it out. You were there to watch them fight one-on-one in the center of the arena. And here you get another of these really iconic parts of the film, and this is the thumbs up versus the thumbs down. It would be the decision of whoever was organising the games about whether a gladiator would be spared or would be killed, and of course their decision was influenced by the crowd. Here, the thing is that a thumbs down meant death. However, that's not actually clear in the surviving archaeology, in the surviving source material that we have. And some actually now believe that a thumbs up given by the editor or the emperor was actually a sign of them killing the gladiator rather than sparing his life. So gladiators, I guess in a funny way, you could say, were like the influencers of their day. They were very, very popular. They gained like fan followings. They were alluring. They were sexy. You know, these very fit, muscly fighters who risked their lives fighting in the arena. There's also a brilliant graffiti from Pompeii, which I love, which is near the gladiator barracks. And it's a little drawing of two gladiators fighting. One, a heavily armed secutor against a retiarius, a net fighter. So once again showing those differences in equipment that these gladiators would have had. But where that graffiti is on the wall suggests that it was actually done by a child. So it shows how these gladiators, they weren't just popular with men and women, you know, over the age of 18 or so on. They were also really popular with the youngsters when they were growing up too. So you can see how this almost ancient celebrity nature of gladiators could reward them with a huge following if they did well in the arena, if they gained a reputation for winning.
Strap on his armor. Conceal the wound.
So here we've got it, the final showdown, Maximus versus the Emperor Commodus in the arena. I love this bit. This substructure, amazing engineering achievement, the substructure of the Colosseum added a bit later after the original build. But you have to imagine beneath, you know, they had this wooden kind of contraption above, and then these figures would rise up from beneath. Sometimes it would be scenery, it would be for the beast hunts to kind of create different environments. It was always to add to the spectacle. And you have to imagine these elevators being powered by slaves, as mentioned, that kind of dingy, stinky, dark, beneath the ground part of the Colosseum. But when it comes to gladiators, there certainly were cases where, to add to the spectacle, the gladiators would rise from beneath the ground and appear in this great arena to the roars of the crowd. Can you imagine that? Commodus as a gladiator, well, this is a fascinating one because we do have stories of Commodus fighting in the arena as a gladiator in the last years of his reign. And it is one of the three kind of main attributes to Commodus's madness, his megalomania that seems to occur in the last years of his reign in our admittedly very hostile sources. That, alongside him portraying himself as Heracles, believing himself to be Heracles reborn, wielding sometimes a club and a lion skin, and also renaming Rome after himself too. But Commodus fighting as a gladiator, there is evidence of it. There is the story that he held these massive games, the plebeian games, in which he fought against wild animals with bow and arrow, but he also fought against gladiators, and he always won, which gives you the suggestion that they were probably rigged.
Give me your sword! Sword! Give me a sword!
Sheathe your sword! Sheathe your sword!
With Commodus, it's interesting because during his early years, he would have spent quite a bit of time with the army, in the Marcomannic Wars with Marcus Aurelius. How good he really was with the sword, I don't know. But at least he was, like the stories we have, it kind of adds a bit more colour to them. Because if he was good with the sword, maybe actually he was a very, very good gladiator at the end of the day, but that to me seems unlikely. It seems no matter how much of a skill he had with the sword, if he was fighting against gladiators, he was fighting against professionals who were trained, all their training was for them to be able to fight and to win. So it's more likely that they were rigged so that Commodus won and didn't perish in the arena. And so talking about perishing in the arena, here is the end of the fight. Maximus against Commodus, surrounded by this square of Praetorian soldiers. I must admit, although this is one of the best villain endings in cinema ever, Commodus did not die in the arena. He was assassinated, but he was assassinated in the bath. He was strangled by a professional wrestler. Basically, there's another plot to kill Commodus by a group of senators who fear that they're going to be next on the chopping block. And so rather than that happening, they decide to take action, first by trying to poison him, and then by getting this wrestler to strangle Commodus in the bath. So one of the pillars of the supposed madness, the megalomania of Commodus during the last years of his reign, one of the keystones is this idea that he fought in the arena as a gladiator. Take a step back from that, we know that just before he is assassinated, he does hold these massive games in Rome, the plebeian games, which a lot of gladiators fought in, and also a lot of beasts fought in as well, the beast hunts that occurred before the gladiator games. And supposedly, Commodus, during these games, he fights as a gladiator, but he also fights against beasts with bow and arrow. The next part of Commodus' supposed madness is the fact that he believed he was Hercules, the god, the divine hero Hercules reborn. So that's why you see statues of Commodus with like the lion skin, with the club, trying to imitate Hercules. So they kind of go hand in hand, this great fighter, and then you see Commodus ultimately fighting in the arena too. The third and final part of Commodus' madness is that he wants to rename Rome. I think it's Colonia Commodiana, so rename it after himself. You could kind of see a similar thing with the Emperor Nero and his theatricality, his love of performing alongside actors, and how the senators were supposedly forced to applaud and clap along and support Nero doing this. You can also imagine, if the stories are true, that senators watching on, and probably they'd be aghast to see their emperor performing, fighting as a gladiator, like the lowest of the low in regards to status, doing something so degrading in the eyes of the elite, them having to kind of stomach it and just clap and support the emperor.
Maximus.
Quintus, free my men. Senator Gracchus is to be reinstated. There was a dream that was Rome. It shall be realized.
Hope you enjoyed that deep dive with me, Tristan Hughes, and don't you worry, there's a lot more coming your way very, very soon. So make sure to like and subscribe, and also to check out my podcast, The Ancients.